Millions of people in Afghanistan face acute food insecurity, the UN warns. The crisis is exacerbated by sharp cuts in global aid funding and the forced deportation of Afghans from neighbouring countries. So, who could step in to avert a catastrophic hunger crisis? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Tom McRae. Devastated by decades of war and instability, Afghanistan is facing a multitude of crises. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021, it's been subjected to international sanctions and is largely isolated. Now, once again, Afghanistan is facing a severe humanitarian crisis. The World Food Programme has warned that it's unable to provide urgently needed assistance to millions of Afghans. It's the result of drastic cuts in aid funding by international donors, especially the US and Europe. The situation is compounded by the ongoing forced deportation of millions of Afghans from Pakistan and Iran. So how will these overlapping crises shape the future of the country and its people? We will discuss this with our panel of guests in just a moment, but first this report from Imogen Kimber.
This 7-month-old baby girl is malnourished. She's in Afghanistan, which is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. The onset of the cold weather is worrying her mother.
Winter is hard for us. We can't afford to buy wood. My daughter is just a baby. Anything my husband earns we spend on food. We can't afford heating.
The UN estimates 17 million Afghans don't have access to enough food, 3 million more than last year. 4 million of them are children already facing malnutrition, with rates increasing in those younger than 5. The situation is worsening. One of the causes is dramatic cuts in international funding, which means there isn't enough aid to go around.
The people need to step up now in order for us to avert the most, I'd say the most extreme impacts in the country. Now, what we need is $570 million over the next 6 months to provide essential assistance to about 6 million people in Afghanistan.
But it's not the only reason.
Essential services, already insufficient and uneven across the country, are stretched to breaking point as Afghan refugees return in record numbers. Over 2.6 million Afghans returned in 2025.
Afghan refugees have been forcibly returned from Iran and Pakistan. Not only is there not enough humanitarian assistance for them, Afghanistan doesn't have adequate infrastructure after decades of war. There's also extreme weather. Drought and floods have destroyed crops and killed livestock. And a devastating earthquake has left more people in desperate need of help. Since the Taliban took power in 2021, development assistance has largely ended, and other sources of aid have fluctuated. 4 years later, Afghans are suffering more than ever. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests now. Joining us from Kabul is Ubaidullah Bakhir, an adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. He specialises in peace and conflict resolution. In Islamabad is Zeeshan Salahuddin, the Director Advisory of the Centre for Regional and Global Connectivity at Tabadlab, a Pakistani policy think tank. Also in Kabul is Kiana Alavi, the Norwegian Refugee Council's advocacy manager in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being with us here on Inside Story. Kiana, if I can begin with you. I mean, we've heard about the struggles of people in Afghanistan right now, and we'll get into some of the reasons for why that is. But first, can you just give us an idea of what people are facing there as they head into another bitterly cold and desperate winter?
Yes, and first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. As you mentioned, the situation in Afghanistan continues to get worse. Afghanistan is a country that faces a multitude of crises, from the returns that we've seen and the huge influx and the rate of influx that we witnessed in 2025. through to the natural disasters that we witness, such as the Kunar earthquake, as well as climatic events such as floods and droughts that we see across the country. The people of Afghanistan have had to deal with these crises for decades, but what is happening, as you mentioned, is that the international community is turning its back on the Afghan population. We saw this with the US aid cuts, but not just the US, with other countries following suit. And with the funding continuing to dwindle, whilst the needs increasing, it is really a shame to watch the eyes of the world look away from what is being faced in Afghanistan by the people. Afghanistan has always faced a displacement crisis, not just externally from Iran and Pakistan, but also internally. Like I mentioned, the climatic events means that a lot of people were internally displaced. And for those who are returning to the country, including the 2.6 million that we've seen just this year return from Iran and Pakistan, they're returning to a future riddled with uncertainty. They're facing a lack of shelter and a lack of employment and a lack of opportunities for all members of the family.
We've obviously seen a number of events, like you say, conspire against the country, seemingly all at the same time. Obaidullah, 3 million more people face acute hunger this year. That's a total of 17 million. So can you just explain what the government is doing at this point in time? What can it do for its people?
Hi, thank you for having me here. I mean, it's an impossible situation. When was the last time you heard of 7 million people returning to a country in a span of 4 years? These numbers are unfathomable. And then it gives you very little time to plan, because it's not just about documenting these people. Most of them are people who were born in exile, in refuge. They're coming back to the country for the first time, providing them documentation, helping them settle, helping them find shelter, and then planning for it in a way where you don't overcrowd your cities, but you also don't develop townships that are so far off from work and opportunities that these people will be seeking. I mean, one side of it is we did see a boost in GDP. The World Bank's recent report shows an increase in Afghanistan's GDP, but the assessment is that that could be from some of these returnees bringing back their wealth, and the impact economically is going to hit later. So considering all of that, it's quite a tricky situation. The Taliban have, according to them, approved 60 townships that they're building for these refugees that have returned, most of which have been approved. The job has been assigned to the Ministry of Refugees and Returnees, who are organizing it, but the construction is going to be done by the Urban Planning Ministry. It's a huge task, and with dwindling aid and support and changing priorities in the world, where aid cuts are happening both for political reasons as well as for them focusing more on security and other in this whole marketplace of calamities, there seems to be lesser and lesser attention being paid to Afghanistan. And as your guest mentioned from NRC, the fact that there are natural disasters and all the political turbulence that is happening in the region, all of them make it very difficult to be happy and hopeful.
Indeed. Zeeshan, if we can bring you in here, do you think that we're seeing a preventable humanitarian catastrophe, that the likes of Iran and Pakistan in pushing Afghans back into their country are worsening at this point?
I mean, the conditions are absolutely worsening. The stats don't lie. 17.6 million people facing acute food shortages is no joke, and this is no longer hyperbolic. I mean, the World Food Program is beset by funding cuts from across the world, particularly from the US and the EU, and that is going to create this trifecta of issues that will lead to this level of malnutrition. And, you know, people in Pakistan can absolutely sympathize with what is happening in Afghanistan. Pakistan, as you might know, is also a country that suffers from acute food shortages. The same categories that have been applied to Afghanistan, 10.5 million people in Pakistan also suffer from acute food shortages. We have one of the largest malnutrition and stunting and wastage ratios and rates in the world. And we've also suffered through natural disasters, as our colleague from the NRC, which I'm a big fan of, by the way, mentioned earlier. So And when these climate events also happen, that's when the acute food shortages, even in Pakistan, also tend to spike up as people are displaced, livelihoods are lost, crops are destroyed, infrastructure is washed away, and so on and so forth. As it stands right now, given the World Food Programme's budget cuts across the board, given the fact that the refugees are being sent back from Iran and Pakistan, and there are, at least on the Pakistani side, I don't claim to speak for the Iranian side, very logical reasons for doing so, as well as the suspension of the U.S. humanitarian assistance, including, of course, the funding, the freezing of the $9.5 billion of assets by the U.S. and $2 billion by the EU. All of it is going to lead to this kind of a crisis. So at present, given current circumstances and the confluence of these three very kind of catastrophic things for Afghanistan, I don't necessarily see a way in which this can be quickly fixed. But the path forward, I think, will have to be rationalized against responsible sovereign behavior as well as good governance on part of the de facto authorities in Afghanistan.
Kiana, from what you're seeing and dealing with on a daily basis, how close is the country to a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe?
I mean, we're already seeing a humanitarian catastrophe. We're seeing that different crises are appearing, but neither the authorities here nor humanitarian organizations on the ground have the capacity to respond to it adequately. For example, the returnee crises. With the funding cuts, as well as a lack of capacity from the authorities' side, we're just seeing a lot of people be left behind from very, very vital aid. And as your other guests mentioned, many of them were born outside of Afghanistan and are coming back to a country where they have, well, not even coming back, but entering a country for the first time where they have no knowledge of what support is there for them. And when we see earthquakes, for example, like we saw in Kunar, that was so devastating and also displaced many ahead of a harsh winter condition, it's devastating to see that the international community is still waiting for there to be a catastrophe before responding adequately. After the Taliban takeover in August 2021, we saw development funding completely disappear from Afghanistan. So as a result of it, the funding that was coming to Afghanistan, albeit not enough, was just to respond to humanitarian crises as opposed to mitigating any future ones or preventing it or putting in steps for the Afghan population to stand on their own 2 feet. So without longer-term, multi-year and development funding, we're just going to see the humanitarian crises get worse and worse. And I don't know what criteria the international community needs to see before adequately responding to it and not leaving the Afghan population behind any further.
Obaidullah, is the Taliban government actually doing enough? Can you just run us through exactly what it is doing and what more it could do to really go out to the international community and get some sanctions lifted or find some more donors, find some more aid somewhere? Is it doing enough to put pressure on people outside of the country to allow that to happen?
I mean, it's a Sisyphean struggle, honestly. It's trying to deal with one thing and then it being compounded with many other things. It's just the sheer scale and the very tight time frame that all of this is happening in. And like, I wish that this was due to economic reasons by these countries that are pushing out refugees. It's worth noting that Turkey is also deporting a large number, obviously nothing compared to the millions coming from Pakistan and Iran, but mostly it's being done for political reasons. And we've seen that as a leverage, as a political tool that has been employed. And just to use people's lives like that, what it creates is a further security risk as well, right? I mean, if you're getting millions crossing over every year, you have no time to vet, not even vet if they're mistakenly deporting their own people, if they're deporting people that could be a risk to the region, no time to go through the material that is passing through the border. And also, like, it creates a very anti-regional country sentiment amongst these refugees. You know, I mean, there was a very famous clip that came out of a person who was born, I think, in Pakistan and was being deported. And he says, well, I lost everything that I had. If I can find a rifle, I'll go back and fight against this regime, you know? So all of these are problems, especially considering that Pakistan has a concern about TTP recruitment happening inside Afghanistan, and increasing that national sentiment against them further makes the Taliban's job of maintaining security quite difficult. With aid cuts, with the lack of actual openness towards engagement with the Taliban, it does create an uphill battle for them, which they're surprisingly doing decently at, which is something that no one saw coming in the past 4 years, to see the economic stability to the extent that we see it, with all the limitations, frozen assets, aid cuts, the world's lack of interest in what happens to Afghanistan. It's still been decent, but there are calamities in the corner, and we have to look out for them, and the Taliban need all the support that they can get.
OK, Zeeshan, I want to get your response to that. Do you think that neighbouring countries, like Pakistan, are offloading their responsibility and dumping it on Afghanistan?
I think that's very reductive and fairly unfair to Pakistan. Pakistan, as you might know, is a country that has hosted Afghan refugees for 46 countries. That is the longest length of time any country in modern history has catered to tens of millions of refugees from another country, provided them shelter, food, job opportunities, education, health. All of that has been available to Afghan refugees here. But I think this whole idea of whether or not the Taliban regime is doing enough, I don't think it's doing enough. I don't think it's a sovereign, rational actor. The Taliban regime that currently exists inside of Afghanistan is a regime that actively supports, aids and abets terrorists and terrorism. I'm glad to see Alavi, my old friend, who's been in every single one of the conversations that I've hosted on Afghanistan, accepting that the TTP is active inside of Afghanistan, is actively recruiting. And yes, while you can claim that economics is not a reason, I personally don't believe it's that big of a reason, or that politics is a reason. I think a big reason for Pakistan is, moving forward, going to be security. That's the primary lens through which it views Afghanistan and through which it views how to manage the refugee crisis. I mean, in November of this year, when the peace talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan were held in Istanbul and they summarily collapsed, 2 days after that, the TTP claimed a car bombing in G11 in the city of Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, a city that Tabadlab, for example, himself has called home for a very, very long time and is very fond of. And that in of itself establishes the security paradigm that we have to deal with constantly. Now, what do the refugees have to do with this? In Pakistan, there's two categories of refugees. The first is the documented refugees. These are the ones that have the POR cards, the ACC cards that are recognized by the UNHCR. And then there's millions that are undocumented. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they're doing. And while I don't necessarily agree with the sentiment that all Afghan refugees are bad, you have to bear in mind the politics as well as the public perception that this generates over the course of time. That if the country is unable to track and properly trace where Afghan refugees in the country might be, and the only option that we see of securing our borders, which we've seen in multiple instances, skirmishes across with our Western neighbor, then one of the mechanisms that Pakistan is going to end up deploying is to deport these refugees back to Afghanistan at a time which, by the claims of the Afghan Taliban themselves, is safe, secure, and according at least to Muttaqi, is prime time for these refugees to return to that country.
Kiana, do you think that there's any serious regional coordination actually underway at this point in time, or is every country really just operating within its own national interests? And how difficult does that make it for an organisation like yours to try and deal with the consequences of that?
At present, I don't think there is any regional approach to this crisis. We see different countries announce their plans. We saw it from Iran and we saw it from Pakistan, albeit they were closely tied to each other timeline-wise. However, they were not linked as part of a wider plan. But what is really worrying is because there isn't a regional approach, there is not any support from the international community to at least ensure that no return is forced or conducted in an unsafe and undignified manner. We're seeing mass returns to scales that we should not be seeing when the country, albeit there is activity from a GDP perspective, it is not sufficient enough to support the 2.6 million who have returned so far and the millions other that are currently at risk of deportation from both Iran and Pakistan. And just to comment on the previous point that was mentioned regarding the ongoing tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, from our side, one of the biggest worries is, as a result of these tensions at the political level, whether it's security reasons or politically driven, we are really calling for the international community and Pakistan to not increase forced returns to Afghanistan as a result or in retaliation, because the situation in Afghanistan is not sufficient enough for the returnees to actually stand on their feet, to build a life, and to actually stay in Afghanistan because of the current situation with the economy. And one thing to note is that many of the families that are returning, they would have returned from being dual income households, or at least have more opportunities for livelihood and income. And they're coming back to a country where the women are not able to work, and even the men would find it very difficult. I've met with many returnees from Iran and Pakistan. All of them are saying that they are going into debt and they just need support to repay the debt, and not even able to get support to build a life for themselves, their families, and their children.
Yeah, they don't know where to start. Obadullah, can you just respond to that? What effect are the Taliban policies of not allowing women working outside of the home? What effect is that having on the country? And is there any meaningful internal pressure to try and change course, or are they pretty much insulated from that by the public?
I mean, it's locking out a large population of the country that could help, economically speaking. And there are conversations internally, even within the movement, regarding how to resolve that issue. It seems to be the opinions of the old guard that are dominating the policies. There has to be a thinking of how we need to tap in. I mean, if nothing else, we need female doctors. We need the women to be educated to contribute to the economy. But also, if you allow me to respond to earlier points, I mean, it's quite rich coming from Zeeshan regarding legitimacy when his own state self-identifies as a hybrid state. They've changed their constitution. They have a military dictator in power. But also this logic of, if a country is incapable or unwilling to stop terrorist movement, is exactly the logic that India used to bomb them. It's the exact same logic that Israel uses to dispel and expel millions of Gazans from their home. And that's quite a problematic argument to make, and I don't even need to go into the details of it. But it's not like TTP does not have a history. I mean, we can't have amnesia. We know exactly where the group emerged. They've tried to bomb Afghanistan multiple times, zero results to show for it. They claim the leadership is here. They can't seem to find them. They can't seem to target them. And we've seen videos emerging of them walking around areas in Pakistan and claiming that they're there. All these attacks that are happening are deplorable, are sad. The Afghan regime has constantly said that they don't endorse the TTP or their actions. They've done whatever they could to contain them. Remember that the Taliban facilitated talks between the Pakistani government and the TTP, which eventually failed because the Pakistani government changed regimes and didn't want to move forward with it. Okay. So the fact is that Pakistan has a fair share of problems, and it's not just the TTP. There are multiple other groups, there are political groups that they're struggling with, and they need to address that. There are thousands of refugees from Pakistan as a result of military operations that are living inside Afghanistan. Right. Those too are a burden on Afghanistan, but Afghanistan does not politicize them or expel them just to put pressure on Pakistan.
Okay, Zeeshan, I want to bring you in once again. How much concern is there within Pakistan about the instability that all of this is causing and what that could mean in the months and years ahead?
I mean, the instability is very real. The stated purpose of the TTP is the dismantling of the Pakistani state, and their very specific target, which we've seen hundreds of occur over the last 4 years, especially since the fall of the Republic in Afghanistan, has been to attack primarily law enforcement agencies, but in addition to that, politicians and political actors wherever possible. Ubaidullah Bahir and I go way back. We have healthy debates and discussions, but I think there's something to be said about false equivalence being conducted with Pakistan versus Afghanistan being compared to Israel versus Gaza or India with Pakistan. The key difference between these two areas is that the World Food Report program World Food Program report that you quoted, the World Food Program is part of the UN system, and it's the UN system that has categorically established that the TTP is the largest armed group in Afghanistan, enjoying substantial support from the Taliban regime. So to say that these incidents or these cases can be compared in any meaningful way is frankly reductive. And sorry, if I may, Tabadlab, I didn't really interrupt you when you were speaking. I would appreciate it if you would let me finish my points. The other point about, they have done all they can to curb the TTP, I don't think that's necessarily true at all. There's active aiding and abetting that has been happening. In fact, when the Republic fell and the Afghan Taliban took over, two of the very first things that happened was that Masood went over to Akhundzada and swore allegiance. That's the Pakistani Taliban swearing allegiance to the Afghan Taliban. And the second thing that happened was that the Afghan Taliban let go of hundreds of TTP fighters from their jails. If that does not cement the foundation and basis for close coordination, then I don't know what does. But if you will allow me just one more second. Quickly. Because Kiana mentioned something, and I think that's actually incredibly important. And I completely agree with you, Kiana, in that regional coordination is absolutely necessary. I think every country, including Pakistan, I would say, is fighting for its own rights and its own perspective. But if there was a regional push and pressure, I think we might see some kind of positive move.
Okay, I want to finish with you, Kiana, and bring it back to the people that are dealing with the fallout from all of this. What is one realistic action that the international community could take now that would actually make a real difference for the people of Afghanistan?
I think a key action, like I mentioned, is not leaving the Afghan population behind. And a key way to do that is by not cutting funding any further and reinstating the funding, the very, very essential funding that was already cut. And as I mentioned previously, long-term development funding is essential because otherwise we're going to see humanitarian organizations like NRC, like many others, just respond to the immediate needs of populations. And that's just putting a plaster, basically, on a big crack on a massive brick wall when a flood is coming. That is really not a sustainable way of dealing with a massive humanitarian crisis. And we're seeing a lot of really hard-won fights and progress be completely undone in front of our eyes. And I just want to finish by saying that we talked a lot on this program, well, the other colleagues did, about the political and security situation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I really urge the international community to, when they are, to ensure that the people of Afghanistan are at the heart of these conversations, because we weren't talking about the humanitarian situation on the ground. When we're talking about the political issues, we're talking about security instead.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time. We'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much, Kiana, Zeeshan and Tabadlab. We really do appreciate your time and your thoughts here today. Thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That is aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here. Goodbye for now.